A well-known judge and attorney are in the spotlight tonight.
It has to do with a newly released police file about the death of a young woman last year, a death police later ruled a suicide. Tonight, the I-Team's Nancy Amons joins us with the first of several reports. Nancy?
Well, police first considered the death of this woman suspicious because of threats that police were told she made before her death. Threats to expose a judge and a lawyer, and that prompted police to look deeper. Friends of Lee Terry say she had it all. She was beautiful, smart, classy, from a Belmead family, her father a surgeon. But there was a dark side, her friends say. She drank and mixed alcohol with prescription drugs. A series of drunk driving charges landed her in the court system. Her interactions with a judge and a defense attorney and a trip to Mobile, Alabama became part of a police investigation into her death.
911 was the exact location of your emergency.
May 25, 2016, a maintenance man at the Stallman building in downtown Nashville calls 911.
I'm pretty sure that maybe somebody passed away.
Lee Terry was found on her bed, a Smith & Wesson handgun similar to this one at her temple. Police later established she'd been dead about 3 weeks. Metro Police conducted an investigation that would take months. They eventually concluded it was a suicide. But during the investigation, witnesses whose statements were recorded by Metro detectives recounted threats that they say Terry had made in Alabama, threats to expose 2 of the men on that trip, General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland and his friend, defense attorney Brian Lewis.
No, you can sit wherever you want. You can sit. Yeah.
Lewis was interviewed the day after Terry's body was found. The apartment where she was found, both her name and Lewis's name are on the lease.
Yeah, I co-signed the lease, I think, around beginning of April.
Terry listed Lewis as her boyfriend for the emergency contact. They both had keys. Lewis would confirm something in a second interview a month later. It was recorded at Central Precinct. He confirmed that he and Terry had a sexual relationship. Lewis is married.
It would be classified a friend and a friend with benefits. Had I had sex with her on occasions? Yes.
The relationship began, he had said in the earlier interview, after Lee Terry was his client.
I'll give you the whole history if you want it.
All right.
Met Lee about 3 years ago, represented her for free in a DUI case. She was in with a whole group of friends.
This is the paperwork on file at the clerk's office. Lewis represented Terry on a 2013 drunk driving arrest, a DUI second offense. The charge was reduced to reckless driving in General Sessions Court. She got 6 months probation. Court records show Judge Casey Moreland terminated her probation early. He's the same judge on the Alabama trip just days before Lee Terry's suicide. It was a trip that witnesses say turned awkward, ending with Lewis sending Terry home early.
She was just mad that whole day. It was one of those deals where she was just mad that whole day and was just abusive towards everybody.
Terry's friend, Natalie Amos, was on that trip. She says Terry was arguing with Lewis.
Very heated.
Okay.
She and Brian are yelling at each other.
In the second interview, the Metro detective asks Lewis about text messages Terry sent Lewis that night. Texts, he said, threatened to reveal intimate relationships between he and Terry and between Natalie Amos and Judge Moreland, who was also married.
Because she said in there that she was going to expose Casey and Natalie's relationship and on the text, and that she was going to talk about to your wife.
Yeah.
Did she do any of those things?
No, she did not. I took that as an idle type threat from her, something that was made in the heat of the moment, and that that she wouldn't follow through with.
But Natalie Amos thought there was something more to the threat than just jeopardizing marriages. Terry had been working at Lewis's law office. Amos says during the trip, Terry threatened to reveal something she had recently discovered that she said could ruin Lewis personally and professionally.
And she said, okay, I hope you're ready. She's like, I will ruin you. And she said, I know things that, she's like, you all both know what I'm talking about. She was very adamant that she knew she had information that would the way that it came across was that could really blow up his life.
2 months after Terry's body was discovered, detectives interviewed Judge Moreland at his office in the courthouse. Police confirmed the judge's interview was not recorded. The detective's notes indicate Moreland was asked about Terry's threats. Moreland said he thought she would calm down and come to her senses. He says he felt sadness about her death. The detective's investigation concluded that Terry did in fact commit suicide using a gun owned by Brian Lewis.
There is already fallout from a Channel 4 I-Team investigation into a well-known Nashville lawyer and judge. Today, a formal complaint was filed with the Board of Professional Responsibility against both Judge Casey Moreland and attorney Brian Lewis.
As the I-Team first reported last night, it all started with the death of a woman named Lee Terry. Police concluded she killed herself last spring. The detectives' report into her death is now public. And now so are allegations that sexual favors may have affected the outcome of court cases. The I-Team's Nancy Amons joins us now with the latest in her investigation.
Well, General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland was interviewed by Metro detectives after Lee Terry's death. He was one of the people who was with Terry on a trip to Alabama last year. Now, we've been trying to interview him about allegations that came out in this police investigation, and we've been trying to ask him about another woman's court fines and how they disappeared. This may be the last video taken of Lee Terry alive. Security camera footage from the Stallman building. It's now in the evidence vault. Police say the night of May 4th, 2016, Terry walked her dog Lana one last time, went into her 9th floor apartment alone, then shot and killed herself. A detective's investigation would discover Terry had returned just a few days earlier from a trip to Mobile, Alabama.
Just know that she was irate.
Natalie Amos was on that trip. What was supposed to be a fishing weekend ended prematurely for Terry. Eyewitnesses told police Terry kept arguing with her traveling companions, especially Brian Lewis. He's the man police would discover was paying her rent at the Stallman. Lewis told police during a recorded interview they were friends with benefits. Amos told police Terry had threatened to expose an affair between Terry and Lewis and threatened to divulge something she had recently seen on Lewis's computer.
She threatened him, and she's like, the gig's up, and she said, and I'm not talking about your wife.
Amos at first didn't want to name another person who was on the trip, Judge Casey Moreland, a close friend of attorney Brian Lewis.
I know you don't want to mention somebody, but I
If you need it.
just need to know who we're talking about.
Casey Moreland.
Okay.
But Moreland's name was in the spotlight in the detective's report. During the investigation into Terry's death, allegations were made by Amos and 2 of Terry's former boyfriends. Their interviews are in the police file. All say Terry claimed she had had sex with Moreland in his office in exchange for a lighter sentence on a DUI case.
She was like, Natalie, I was out of options. It was that, or I was looking at serious jail time.
We were not able to independently confirm the allegation. Court records show that Moreland was not the judge when Terry's charges were reduced. We do see Moreland's stamp on a document appearing to cut her probation short by a few months. Natalie Amos has a history of drunk driving charges too.
I got 2 DUIs back to back.
She says that in 2015, she was struggling to pay her fines, $1,200, and mentioned it to her friend Lee Terry.
And she said, well, I can call Casey. And I was like, Casey? She said, Judge Moreland.
The 3 met at Pinewood Social. Amos says she was hoping to get more time to pay the fines since she was working.
I was just really honest with him. And I'm like, obviously I shouldn't have procrastinated. I've been calling, and I'm kind of screwed here. I just need like 4 weeks and I can pay this off. And he just is like writing and not saying anything. And I'm like, so if you could just tell me who to call, that'd be so helpful. And he's like, that's what I'm doing. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I'll be quiet. And then he just said, text me, this information. And I did. And I just really thought I was going to get an extension, and he just went away.
The court's computer system shows that on July 14, 2015, her fines were all waived. Natalie was declared an indigent. She didn't have to pay anything, even though she had a job.
Be granted, Shirley. You may go.
Forgiving fines isn't that unusual. In fact, we did a story in August 2015 about how many fines Judge Moreland waived. There is a process. Someone fills out a form listing their income. The judge reviews it and says yes or no. Natalie Amos says she never went to court, never filled out that form.
No.
Nothing.
No. And I didn't even know about that until like today, honestly.
There's a form you were supposed to fill out to say
Right.
you are applying for indigency.
I didn't know about that until today.
Did you ever go to court?
No.
It just disappeared.
Yes.
I checked, and Amos's name wasn't on the docket that day. There is a motion for indigency in the court file. It's only signed by Casey Moreland, and there's no date. Natalie thanked the judge by text messages. She saved the text she says Moreland sent her in exchange. Your fees, fines, and court costs are taken care of. Now you officially owe me. Ha ha.
When I got that text, and I was like, okay. I see.
She says she didn't play ball. There was no quid pro quo. But she says she and Moreland did have an intimate relationship later. The I-Team approached Judge Moreland. We had a lot of questions.
This looks like a firing squad.
We asked for an interview about the Alabama trip, about Lee Terry, and about Natalie.
Natalie Amos.
We asked to sit down and talk on camera.
All right, well, let me try to figure out what a good time would be.
Okay.
We've continued to press the judge for an interview. He declined. He did send a statement to the Nashville scene regarding Lee Terry and Natalie Amos, saying, quote, "At no time did I intervene on their behalf during or after judgments were rendered by the appropriate courts." The statement goes on to say, while I had limited acquaintance with both Miss Terry and Miss Amos, I never had an improper relationship with either of them.
How many times do you think police officers hear this from people they pull over? I know so-and-so.
Our Channel 4 I-Team found it worked when a judge intervened in a traffic stop for a female friend. Nancy Amons joins us now with more on the investigation.
Well, what happened was the end result was a woman was allowed to drive away on a revoked license after Judge Casey Moreland made a phone call. And we want to warn you, there is some adult content in the end of the story. The dreaded blue lights, you're being pulled over. If you have friends in high places, maybe you're not getting a ticket or going to jail. Well, that's what happened here on 6th Avenue South downtown on June 16th at 3:20 in the afternoon. Motorcycle officer Michael Douglas of Central Precinct tells me he's just starting his shift when he notices a woman driving without a seatbelt, and her tags are expired.
93.6 Peabody, Tennessee.
He calls dispatch to find out if she has a valid driver's license. She doesn't.
Comes back to a Natalie Amos, D. David, revoked.
She's Natalie Amos, a very close friend of General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland. She says she calls the judge, then they send a series of text messages back and forth. She shared what she said were the texts between them. Moreland texts her, "Find out the officer's name." She writes, "Michael Douglas." Moreland writes, "If I need to talk to him, I will." She texts Moreland that the officer is running her license, adding, "It's the last thing I need right now." Moreland texts, "I gotcha, girl." Then he texts, "What's happening? Did you drop my name?" But the officer continues to write her a ticket until Moreland makes a phone call to the officer's supervisor at Central Precinct. Metro Police verify what happened next in a written statement. That Sergeant Mark Byrne, Douglas's supervisor, was contacted by Judge Moreland. Police say Moreland tells the sergeant that Amos was on the way to his office for a meeting. The statement says Byrne perceived that Judge Moreland wanted the motorist to be allowed to continue to his office. Byrne rides his police motorcycle over to where Amos is stopped to convey that message to the officer. Moreland texts Amos that help is on the way, and she writes, "Sweet." Amos is allowed to drive away on a revoked license. She doesn't get a citation for it, just the ticket for no seatbelt and expired tags. As we've been reporting in our investigation into Judge Moreland, it isn't the only time the judge acted on Amos's behalf. That ticket for the seatbelt and registration violation, Moreland sent the traffic court clerk a letter recalling the ticket. She didn't have to pay it. It was retired. And we told you Judge Moreland helped erase $1,200 in old court fines that Amos owed. He declared her indigent, even though she had a job.
I mean, my $1,200 was just gone.
So what kind of business did Amos have with Moreland at his office the day she was stopped by the motorcycle officer? Amos showed us texts she said were between her and Moreland. The texts back and forth show they didn't have a meeting planned, no official business. In fact, when she was stopped, Amos was on her way to meet the judge at a bar called the Batter's Box. After they met for drinks, Amos said they did go back to the courthouse to have sex in Moreland's office. Moreland texts her at 6:30 that night, "Damn, you're hot." The next afternoon, Amos texts that she's super grateful for his help. The judge texts, "Just used my superpowers." And then, "My desk still has butt marks on it." Now, I've reached out to Judge Moreland a number of times asking for an interview. He declined.
It's the last thing you'd expect from a judge, texting derogatory comments and taking a picture of defendants.
But when the Channel 4i team combed through thousands of texts Judge Casey Moreland sent a woman, we found he was sending some of them directly from the bench during hearings. Chief Investigative Reporter Jeremy Finley is here now with the latest.
These texts were shared by a woman who knows Moreland well. She says they've been in a sexual relationship. And what these texts show is among the reasons a judicial expert believes Casey Moreland should step down. There are a whole lot of texts between Judge Casey Moreland and his friend Natalie Amos that are so sexually explicit we can't show you on television. But we can show you what the judge sent her while he was in the business of dispensing justice on dockets for human trafficking and drug addiction. At one point, Amos sent a Bitmoji to pay attention to her. The judge's response, "Just been working, sorry. My hoes in court keep me busy." It's a term he uses again, texting on another day. "Tuesdays and Wednesdays are my busy days, hoes and junkies."
That raises yet another problem.
The Channel 4i team showed the texts as well as all of our previous investigations into Casey Moreland to law professor Charlie J.
I do.
A Carnegie Fellow who has testified before the U.S. Senate as an expert on judicial ethics.
If you were using disparaging terms to characterize people who appear before you on a pretty regular basis, it suggests that you harbor a bias against them that calls your impartiality into question.
We also show Jay how we found again and again the judge text Amos for personal reasons while he's holding court, even while listening to information about a wiretap and in a hearing on a cocaine case. At one point, he sends her a picture of the defendants before him.
The business of being on the telephone in the middle of court proceedings is itself a problem.
The text between Moreland and Amos reveal that the judge intervened when Amos was stopped by police, that the judge helped dismiss her tickets, and erased more than $1,000 in court fines that Amos owed.
I think it's still very problematic because judges need to be mindful of the power they exercise and not to use that power for their own personal advantage.
Bottom line, do you think this judge needs to resign?
If what is reported here is true, this may not be a judge who is well suited to the bench. And so I think that the best bet is to step down.
This looks like a firing squad.
A Nashville judge learns the Channel 4i team approaching his bench was just the beginning. Now he faces the feds. A criminal indictment and stunning claims of a cover-up puts a Nashville judge in handcuffs. A startling result of months of investigations by the Channel 4i team. How it all unfolded now on Channel 4 News at 5.
Live with breaking news. This is Channel 4 News at 5.
We have been calling our Channel 4i team investigation into Judge Casey Moreland, influence, infidelity, and men in power. Today, we learned those words may just scratch the surface.
That's right. Now there are new claims, including a cover-up and bribery. We begin with the Channel 4i team reporter who first broke this story, Nancy Amons. Nancy, we saw your stories mentioned often in today's affidavit.
That's right. You know, we've done a lot of stories about Judge Casey Moreland, and today the U.S. Attorney's Office announced that the FBI took him into custody early this morning at his sister's house. They started investigating him after our series of Channel 4 I-Team investigations, which have been going on for about 2 months now. Today's bombshell, as they say, Moreland tried to bribe a witness.
Judge Moreland appeared in court the way he's used to seeing the defendants before him, shackled hand and foot. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced they took him into custody because they feared he was jeopardizing their investigation. Just in the last weeks, they say Moreland attempted to pay a $5,000 bribe to get a witness to recant her story. She's not named in the complaint, but it's Natalie Amos. She told the Channel 4 I-Team she had sex with Moreland and that he dropped her fines and fees and prevented her arrest during a traffic stop. The U.S. Attorney's Office says Moreland used a go-between to try to get Amos to sign an affidavit saying it was all a lie.
The scheme was to be carried out using intermediaries identified in the complaint as CS1 and CS2. To carry out the scheme, Moreland told CS1 to get person 1, and I quote, liquored up real good before presenting her with the affidavit to sign.
But in fact, an FBI agent signed the affidavit. Amos never saw it or the money. The criminal complaint also says Moreland tried to get a police officer to plant drugs in Amos's car in an attempt to destroy her credibility. Moreland will stay locked up until a hearing Friday. His attorney, Peter Stryantz, argued he should be released. He isn't a flight risk. Stryantz says Moreland is in a state of shock.
He's obviously in a bit of a state of shock. You know, certainly didn't expect to be awoken by the Federal Bureau of Investigation at 6 o'clock this morning with a search warrant.
Moreland will be held in a Kentucky jail until Friday. This is just the beginning of the federal case against him.
Now, these charges today involve incidents that have happened just in the last month. These charges alone, if Judge Moreland is convicted, carry a possible penalty of 35 years in prison. Reporting live at the federal courthouse, Nancy Amons, Channel 4 News.